The crisp air of an early autumn afternoon rustled the leaves across the narrow, winding country road. The light filtered through the canopy of trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground, creating a scene that felt almost too peaceful to belong to the world outside. Amy and Michael Peters were driving home from a relaxing weekend in the countryside, the windows down to let in the cool breeze. Their conversations had faded into comfortable silence, both of them soaking in the serene beauty of the landscape that stretched out before them. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Suddenly, as they rounded a bend, something caught Amy's eye. At first, she thought it was a shadow or perhaps a bundle of leaves blown together in a clump. But as the car drew closer, she realized it wasn't debris at all. There, trotting unevenly along the edge of the road, was a small puppy. Its movements were slow, almost labored, and it seemed to stumble every few steps, as though its legs were too tired to carry it any farther. "Michael, stop," Amy said, her voice urgent as she placed her hand on his arm. Without hesitation, Michael slowed the car to a halt. The puppy, hearing the vehicle, paused in its tracks, its small body stiffening as it looked up toward them. From where they were, Amy could see that the animal was scruffy and dirt-covered. Its fur, which might have once been a light shade of brown, was now matted and tangled, with bits of leaves and twigs stuck to it. It looked utterly exhausted. Amy's heart immediately went out to the creature. She had always been an animal lover, and the sight of this lonely, disheveled puppy wandering by itself pulled at her deeply. "We need to help it," she said softly, already reaching for the car door handle. Michael nodded, his brows furrowed in concern. "Where do you think it came from?" he asked, glancing around the deserted stretch of road. There were no houses nearby, no signs of life apart from the gentle sway of the trees. It seemed odd for a puppy to be out here all alone. "I don't see any people." Amy opened the car door cautiously, trying not to spook the animal. As she stepped out onto the gravel shoulder, the puppy's eyes followed her every movement, but it didn't bolt. Instead, it watched her with a mix of curiosity and fear, its small body trembling slightly. "Hey there, sweetie," Amy cooed, crouching down to the puppy's level, her voice soothing and gentle. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The puppy stood frozen for a moment, then, as if reassured by her kind tone, it took a hesitant step forward, its head low but its eyes locked onto Amy's. She could now see more clearly just how frail it looked. Its ribs were faintly visible beneath its fur, and its paws were caked with mud. A pang of sadness washed over her as she wondered how long it had been out here, alone and scared. Michael got out of the car as well, standing back a few feet to give Amy space, but his eyes were scanning the surrounding area, still searching for any sign of the puppy's owner. "I don't see anyone," he muttered, his voice tinged with confusion. "It's like it's just here." Amy reached out slowly, extending her hand for the puppy to sniff. The little creature hesitated, then took another tentative step closer, its tiny nose twitching as it cautiously sniffed her fingers. After a moment, it seemed to decide that she was safe. It took a few more wobbly steps until it was close enough for Amy to gently scoop it up into her arms. As soon as she lifted it, she could feel how light it was, far too light for a puppy of its size. It shivered in her grasp, though whether from cold or fear, she couldn't tell. "Oh, you poor thing," Amy whispered, cradling the puppy against her chest. The warmth of her body seemed to calm it slightly, and it let out a small whimper, nestling closer to her. Michael approached, peering down at the puppy with concern. "It doesn't have a collar," he noted, his brow furrowing deeper. "And it looks like it's been out here for a while. How does a puppy end up wandering out here by itself?" Amy shook her head, her mind already racing with possibilities. "I don't know. Maybe it got lost? Or maybe someone abandoned it." The thought made her heart ache. She looked down at the puppy, which was now resting its head against her arm, its eyes half closed in exhaustion. Whatever had happened, it was clear that the little dog had been through a lot. "We can't just leave it here," she said firmly, meeting Michael's gaze. "We need to take it home, at least for tonight. We can figure out where it came from later." Michael didn't hesitate. Of course, he agreed. We'll take it to the vet tomorrow and see if it's microchipped. Maybe someone's looking for it. With that decision made, Amy carefully carried the puppy to the car, settling it in her lap as they resumed their drive home. As the miles passed, she couldn't stop glancing down at the tiny creature in her arms. It had already fallen asleep, its breathing shallow and even, but something about its presence unsettled her. It wasn't just a mystery of where it had come from, though that was certainly troubling. No, there was something else, something about the way the puppy had been walking, as if it had been headed somewhere specific before they interrupted it. She pushed the thought aside, telling herself that she was just imagining things. The poor animal was probably just lost, scared, and tired. But a nagging feeling lingered in the back of her mind, one that she couldn't quite shake. When they arrived home, Amy gently carried the puppy inside and laid it on a soft blanket in the living room. The puppy stirred for a moment, blinking up at her sleepily before curling into a tight ball and drifting back to sleep. Watching it, Amy couldn't help but feel a surge of protectiveness. Whatever this little creature had been through, it was safe now. "We'll take good care of you," she whispered, brushing a hand over its matted fur. "Don't worry." Later that evening, as Amy and Michael sat on the couch, the puppy still resting peacefully nearby, they began to talk about what might have happened. Michael had called a few local animal shelters and put up a post on social media, hoping that someone might recognize the dog. But so far, no one had responded. What if no one comes forward? Amy asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the sleeping puppy. What if this little guy was just abandoned? Michael sighed, leaning back against the cushions. I don't know. People can be awful sometimes. But we'll keep trying to find its owner. Maybe tomorrow we'll hear something. Amy nodded, but a sense of unease had settled over her. She couldn't stop thinking about the puppy's condition, the way it had been walking with such determination along that road. It was as if it had been heading somewhere, not just wandering aimlessly. And the more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that there was something more to this story, something they weren't seeing yet. The next morning, Amy was the first to wake. She tiptoed into the living room to check on the puppy, expecting to find it still curled up on the blanket. But to her surprise, the puppy was awake and standing at the door, staring intently at the handle. It was the same look the puppy had had when they first found it on the road, focused, purposeful, almost as if it was waiting for something. Amy felt a chill run down her spine. Slowly, she approached the puppy and knelt beside it, placing a hand gently on its head. "Do you want to go outside?" she asked softly, but the question felt strange on her lips. It wasn't just that the puppy needed to go out. It was something more. The puppy looked up at her, its dark eyes filled with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. It wasn't just looking for a place to relieve itself. It was waiting for something she didn't understand. With trembling hands, Amy unlocked the door and opened it. The puppy hesitated for a moment, then trotted out onto the porch, pausing at the top step to glance back at her. It was as if it was asking her to follow. And so she did. As Amy followed the puppy down the path, she couldn't help but feel that something was guiding her, something far beyond her understanding. The puppy moved with purpose, leading her farther from the house and down the quiet road that had brought them together the day before. The road stretched out before them, empty and silent, but Amy's heart was pounding in her chest. She didn't know where the puppy was taking her, but she knew, deep down, that this was no ordinary walk. This was the beginning of something much larger, something that would change everything she thought she knew. And as she followed the puppy into the unknown, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever they were about to discover would leave her speechless. Over the next few days, Amy and Michael tried to make the puppy as comfortable as possible, hoping that someone would come forward to claim it. They named the puppy Buddy for the time being, feeling like the little creature needed a name to call his own, even if it was temporary. They created posts on social media, placed ads on local lost and found pet pages, and contacted nearby animal shelters and vets to see if anyone had reported a missing puppy. The puppy was too young for a microchip, and the lack of a collar tag or any immediate identification made it difficult to trace its origins. Despite their efforts, no one responded. The social media posts didn't lead to any leads, and the shelters reported no missing puppy that matched Buddy's description. Days passed, and the puppy began to settle into the home, though there was something about Buddy's behavior that puzzled Amy and Michael. He didn't seem quite like a normal puppy. There was a nervousness, almost a guarded fear in his movements, particularly when left alone. Buddy had a habit of following them everywhere, never letting them out of his sight. Even when Amy and Michael would walk to another room or just step away for a moment, Buddy would begin to whimper softly, his small body trembling as if something terrible would happen if they left him behind. At first, they chalked it up to anxiety. After all, he was just a young puppy who had been found alone, likely scared and confused by the separation from his home. Yet, the intensity of his attachment was unusual. Most puppies, even anxious ones, eventually grew comfortable in a new environment with love and care. But Buddy remained hypervigilant, his dark eyes always darting from corner to corner as if waiting for something or someone. At night, things became even stranger. Buddy, who usually curled up peacefully in his makeshift bed next to their own, began to have restless episodes. He would wake up suddenly, growling softly, staring toward the window or the door as though something was out there. Several nights in a row, he woke them with his low, throaty growls, but when they looked out the window or checked the door, there was nothing. Michael tried reassuring Buddy by patting his head and speaking in a calm tone, but the puppy remained agitated, refusing to settle back down for several hours. "It's almost like he's waiting for something," Amy said one morning after a particularly restless night. "He keeps looking out the window, as if someone's coming to get him." Michael nodded in agreement, but they couldn't make sense of the puppy's strange behavior. It was as though Buddy wasn't just scared, he seemed to be on edge in a way that didn't fit with the typical fears of a young animal. This raised more questions in their minds. What had happened to Buddy before they found him? Had he been abandoned, or was there more to his past that they didn't yet know? As the days wore on, Amy and Michael became more determined to uncover where Buddy had come from. One afternoon, after taking Buddy for a walk around the neighborhood in the hopes that someone might recognize him, Amy sat down at her computer to do some more research. She combed through online missing pet forums, checked local news sites for any reports of missing dogs, and even expanded her search to nearby towns. But still, there were no matches. Frustrated, Amy leaned back in her chair and glanced at Buddy, who was lying at her feet, chewing half-heartedly on a toy. Something about his situation just didn't add up. If he had been abandoned, surely someone would have seen or heard about it. And if he had run away, why hadn't his owner come looking for him? Michael, sensing Amy's growing frustration, suggested they take a different approach. "What if we try searching for any strange incidents in the area?" he asked. "Maybe something happened that we haven't connected to Buddy yet." Intrigued by the idea, Amy agreed. She started by looking up any local news stories that might mention lost animals or unusual events involving pets. As she scrolled through the pages of search results, something caught her eye, a small, buried report from a few weeks earlier about a break-in at an old house about 10 miles away. The article was short, with only a few sentences describing how the police had been called to investigate a burglary at a long-abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Nothing valuable had been stolen, but there had been signs of recent activity inside the house, including food wrappers and makeshift bedding, as if someone had been living there temporarily. A chill ran down Amy's spine. Could it be related? Could Buddy have somehow come from that farmhouse? The location was remote, and the timeline seemed to fit. It was around the same time Buddy had appeared on the road. But why would a puppy be involved in something like this? It was a stretch, but Amy couldn't shake the feeling that the article was connected to Buddy's strange arrival. That evening, she showed the article to Michael. He raised an eyebrow, surprised by the possibility but intrigued. "It's worth checking out," he said. "Even if it's a long shot, it's better than sitting here with no leads." The next day, Amy and Michael decided to drive out to the old farmhouse mentioned in the article. The house sat at the edge of a dense forest, down a narrow dirt road that felt miles away from civilization. As they approached, Buddy, who had been sitting quietly in the back seat, began to whimper and scratch at the window. His behavior became frantic, unlike anything they had seen before. The closer they got to the farmhouse, the more agitated Buddy became, barking and whining as if he was desperate to get away. "What's wrong with him?" Amy asked, glancing nervously at Michael. "I've never seen him like this." Michael shook his head, worry etched on his face. "I don't know, but whatever's here, it's spooking him." They parked the car a short distance from the house and got out, but Buddy refused to follow. He dug his paws into the seat, his whole body trembling, his eyes wide with fear. It was as if he knew something they didn't, something dangerous lurked ahead. Amy and Michael decided not to force him out of the car, though the sight of Buddy so terrified only heightened their own sense of unease. The farmhouse was old, with its windows broken and its roof sagging in places. Weeds had overtaken the yard, and the porch steps creaked ominously as they approached. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. They cautiously explored the main floor, finding signs that someone had indeed been staying there recently. Old blankets, food wrappers, and empty cans were scattered around the room. As they moved through the house, a sense of unease settled over them. Something about the place felt wrong, as though it held memories of something darker than just abandonment. Michael noticed an odd patch of disturbed earth in the backyard, near the edge of the woods, and decided to investigate further. Together, they ventured outside, walking toward the spot with growing trepidation. Buddy, still in the car, barked furiously as they neared the patch of earth. His frantic barking echoed through the empty landscape, making the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. When they reached the spot, they saw that the ground had been recently dug up and covered again, but not by an animal. It looked deliberate, like someone had been burying something. Michael grabbed a nearby stick and began digging. The soil was loose, and after just a few minutes, they uncovered a small metal box. It was old and rusted, with a heavy lock on it. Amy knelt beside him, her heart racing. What could possibly be inside? She felt a surge of dread, but also an overwhelming sense that this was what Buddy had been leading them to all along. Michael pried the box open, revealing a stack of yellowed papers and a few small, personal items, an old photograph, a ring, and a torn piece of fabric. The papers were fragile, but legible. As they carefully read through them, they uncovered something shocking. The documents were part of an unsolved case involving a missing family that had lived in the area nearly 20 years ago. The farmhouse had once belonged to them before they had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The police had never found any evidence, but the papers they held now hinted at something far more sinister, a history of secrets and betrayals that had torn the family apart. Amy and Michael stared at each other, speechless. The puppy, Buddy, was somehow connected to all of this. His frantic behavior, his constant fear, it all made sense now. He wasn't just a lost puppy. He had likely been living in the farmhouse, unknowingly guarding a secret that had remained buried for years. The realization left them shaken. The puppy had led them to uncover something far more disturbing than they had ever imagined. As they returned to the car, Buddy finally calmed down, his frantic barking replaced by soft whimpers, as if he, too, understood that the truth had finally been revealed. That night, Amy sat on the couch, cradling the puppy in her lap as she absent-mindedly stroked its soft fur. It had only been a few days since they rescued it, but already she felt an emotional bond forming. The puppy, whom they had started calling Buddy, had settled into their home, though it was still skittish, often reacting to the slightest sounds. Amy couldn't shake the feeling that Buddy had been through something traumatic, something far worse than simply getting lost. As she ran her fingers through Buddy's fur, she noticed the faint outline of something on his collar. It was small, almost unnoticeable, a tiny engraving on the inside of the leather strap. She squinted, trying to make out what it was, but the dim lighting in the living room made it difficult. Curious, she called for Michael, who was busy in the kitchen washing dishes. "Hey, can you bring me the flashlight?" she asked, her voice laced with intrigue. Michael wiped his hands on a towel and grabbed the small flashlight they kept in the kitchen drawer. As he handed it to her, he raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" "There's something on Buddy's collar. I didn't notice it before, but it looks like some kind of marking or engraving. I want to see what it is." Michael knelt beside her on the couch, peering over her shoulder as she clicked on the flashlight and angled it toward the collar. The beam of light illuminated the small engraving, a strange symbol, circular in shape, with intricate lines crisscrossing through it. It wasn't a word, at least not in any language they recognized. It looked more like a symbol from another time, something ancient, like a rune or an emblem. "What the hell is that?" Michael murmured, his brow furrowed in confusion. "I have no idea," Amy replied, her voice tinged with wonder. "I've never seen anything like it." Buddy shifted in her lap, but Amy gently held him still, focusing on the symbol. She felt a strange sense of unease wash over her. Why would a puppy, abandoned on a rural road, be wearing a collar with such an unusual marking? The more she stared at it, the more out of place it seemed, like a relic from another era. It didn't make sense, and that only deepened her curiosity. Maybe it's just some weird design from a local pet store? Michael suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. "Maybe," Amy said, though she was unconvinced too. "But it feels older than that. I don't know why, but this looks like something you'd find in a history book, not on a puppy's collar." Michael nodded, standing up and reaching for his phone. "I'll do a quick search online. Maybe we can find out if it's a common symbol or if it has some sort of meaning." Amy continued to examine the symbol, turning the collar in the light to see if there were any other markings she had missed. But that was it, just the one, simple yet mysterious symbol. As she stared at it, she began to feel as though the puppy wasn't just an ordinary stray. Something about its past was strange, and this symbol was the first clue that maybe, just maybe, it had a connection to something much larger than they had originally thought. A few minutes later, Michael came back to the couch, holding his phone. "I didn't find much," he said, sitting down next to her. "But I did find something interesting." He handed Amy the phone, which displayed an article about an abandoned farmhouse a few miles away from where they had found Buddy. The article mentioned local legends about the place, particularly the mysterious disappearance of the family who had lived there decades ago. Rumors swirled around the old house, talk of strange noises, ghostly apparitions, and odd symbols painted on the walls. It was a well-known spot among local paranormal enthusiasts, though most of the townsfolk dismissed the stories as nothing more than small-town gossip. But what caught Amy's attention was a single sentence near the end of the article: "The strange symbol found in the farmhouse matches no known language or cultural marking, but it resembles ancient runes once used by early European settlers." Amy's heart skipped a beat. She quickly scrolled back up to look at the image of the symbol in the article. It was blurry, faded from age, but it looked eerily similar to the one on Buddy's collar. "This can't be a coincidence," Amy whispered, feeling a chill creep down her spine. "This symbol, it's almost the same as the one on the collar." Michael leaned in, his eyes wide as he looked at the screen. "You're right. They're practically identical. But what does that mean?" Amy's mind raced. She couldn't explain it, but she felt like they were on the verge of discovering something big, something that had been hidden for years. Could Buddy have some connection to the old farmhouse? It sounded absurd, but the coincidence was too striking to ignore. "We need to look into this more," Amy said, her voice steady with determination. "I want to know why this puppy, of all things, has a symbol that's connected to an abandoned farmhouse and a family that disappeared." Michael agreed, though he looked hesitant. "Are you sure we want to go down this rabbit hole? This whole thing feels off." "I know," Amy replied, her eyes still fixed on the symbol. "But we have to find out. We can't just ignore this." The next morning, Amy and Michael decided to drive out to the farmhouse. It was about 20 minutes away, nestled deep in the countryside, surrounded by dense woods and overgrown fields. As they approached the property, a sense of unease settled over them. The house stood in ruins, its once proud structure now crumbling and abandoned, the windows shattered, the roof sagging. It looked as though it hadn't been touched in years, maybe even decades. They parked the car at the edge of the property and got out, Buddy trotting along beside them on a leash. The puppy seemed strangely alert, its nose twitching as it sniffed the air, its ears perked up as if it recognized something. "This place gives me the creeps," Michael muttered, glancing around. "I know," Amy said, her eyes scanning the area. "But we're here now. Let's see if we can find anything that connects this place to the symbol." They cautiously approached the house, the wooden steps creaking under their weight. The front door hung off its hinges, barely clinging to the frame. Inside, the house was a mess. Dust and cobwebs coated every surface, and the furniture lay in disarray, as if the occupants had left in a hurry. The air was thick with the musty scent of decay and neglect. They wandered through the rooms, searching for any sign of the symbol they had seen in the article. Buddy, however, seemed to know exactly where to go. The puppy tugged at the leash, pulling them toward a door at the back of the house. It was an old cellar door, covered in grime and nearly hidden beneath layers of dust. "Looks like he's found something," Michael said, glancing at Buddy. Amy knelt down, running her hand over the door's surface. It was heavy, but with Michael's help, they managed to pry it open. The hinges groaned as the door swung inward, revealing a narrow set of stone steps leading down into the darkness. "Should we go down there?" Michael asked, his voice low. Amy hesitated for a moment before nodding. "We have to." They descended into the cellar, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The air grew colder, and the faint smell of damp earth filled their noses. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a small, windowless room, lit only by the beam of Michael's flashlight. It didn't take long for them to spot it. On the far wall, scrawled in faded, crumbling paint, was the same symbol that was on Buddy's collar. Amy's breath caught in her throat. "There it is," she whispered, her heart pounding. "It's the same symbol." But that wasn't all they found. In the corner of the room, hidden beneath a pile of rotting wood and debris, was an old, tattered journal. Amy carefully pulled it free, wiping the dust from the cover. The pages were yellowed with age, but the writing inside was still legible. As they flipped through the pages, they realized it was a diary, written by a woman who had lived in the farmhouse decades ago. She wrote about her family, her life, and her growing fear of the strange occurrences that had begun to plague their home. But the most shocking entry was the last one. It described how they had found a stray puppy wandering near their property, wearing a collar with the same symbol. Amy and Michael exchanged stunned glances. Somehow, this puppy, Buddy, was connected to the same strange events that had caused the family to disappear all those years ago. The symbol, the farmhouse, the puppy, it was all part of a mystery that had yet to be fully uncovered. As they stood there in the cold, dark cellar, the weight of their discovery settled over them. The puppy hadn't just wandered into their lives by accident, it had led them to this place, to the truth that had been hidden for so long. Amy's hands trembled slightly as she held the puppy's leash, the quiet countryside amplifying the sound of her heart thudding in her chest. Michael walked just ahead, his flashlight beam sweeping over the path leading to the old farmhouse. It stood in the distance, barely visible through the overgrown trees and brambles, its silhouette casting an eerie shadow as the last light of the setting sun faded behind the horizon. The puppy, normally timid and reserved, seemed to tug at the leash with renewed energy, as though it knew exactly where it was going. "I don't like this," Amy whispered, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. The air had grown colder as they ventured deeper into the countryside. She had expected to feel unease, given the unsettling history of the place, but the reality of being here, at the edge of the farm, felt far more ominous than any story she'd read online. Michael glanced back, his expression determined but cautious. "We'll just take a quick look," he reassured her, though the tension in his voice was clear. "We've come this far. Something about this place connects with the puppy. We have to see it through." The farmhouse had once been grand, a testament to a time when the land around it was alive with crops and the sounds of daily farm life. Now, it stood abandoned, decrepit, with sagging rooflines and windows darkened by grime and neglect. Vines and ivy twisted up its crumbling walls, covering most of the structure like nature's attempt to reclaim it. The front porch, which once might have been a welcoming place for visitors, now creaked under the weight of decades of abandonment. The puppy, its small body taut with urgency, pulled harder on the leash. Amy had never seen it act this way. For days, it had been quiet and seemingly unsure of its surroundings, but here, it was different. There was a familiarity in the way it moved, an instinct that seemed to guide it toward something only it could sense. The sharp, piercing bark it let out startled them both, its tail wagging wildly now as if it was excited about something just ahead. "Where is it taking us?" Amy murmured as she and Michael followed the determined pup around the side of the house, stepping carefully over tangled roots and under low-hanging branches. The back of the farmhouse was even more overgrown than the front, with large patches of thick, thorny bushes making the terrain difficult to navigate. But the puppy didn't hesitate. It darted forward, leading them to a small clearing behind the house where something was barely visible beneath the brush. Michael stopped and raised his flashlight, illuminating what looked like an old cellar door, hidden beneath years of neglect. Moss clung to the wooden surface, and ivy had twisted its way around the rusted hinges, almost as if the earth itself was trying to keep the door sealed shut. Amy stared at the door, an unsettling feeling growing in her chest. "This has to be it," she said quietly. "This is what the puppy was leading us to." Michael knelt by the door, brushing away some of the vines and dirt with his hands. "It looks like it hasn't been opened in decades." He tried to pry it open, but the wood was swollen with age and water, resisting his efforts. After a few more tries, the hinges groaned loudly, and the door creaked open just enough for them to peer inside. Amy felt her stomach twist as the smell of damp earth and mildew wafted out from the darkness. The air inside was thick, heavy, as if it had been trapped for ages. She shone her flashlight into the space below. It revealed a steep staircase leading into a cellar, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and dirt clinging to the walls. A faint light shimmered off something metallic deep within. The puppy let out a whine, pawing at the ground as if urging them to go in. "Are you sure about this?" Amy asked, her voice small in the stillness of the night. She wasn't sure whether it was the cold air or her nerves that were making her hands shake, but either way, she wasn't feeling comfortable about what lay ahead. Michael nodded, though the unease was evident on his face as well. "We need to see what's down there," he said. "There's a reason the puppy brought us here." They stepped carefully down the stairs, the old wooden steps creaking under their weight. The beam of Michael's flashlight danced across the walls, revealing old farming tools, rusted cans, and broken jars scattered around. In the far corner, something glimmered faintly, reflecting the light. As they approached, they realized it was an old, tarnished metal box, half buried in the dirt. Amy knelt down, brushing away the soil with her fingers. The puppy was right beside her, its nose twitching as it sniffed at the box. Michael knelt beside her, gently lifting the box out of the dirt and placing it on a flat surface. The lock on the box was broken, the metal rusted through in spots. With a small push, the lid creaked open, revealing a collection of items inside. At first glance, it seemed to be nothing more than a few old keepsakes, some yellowed papers, an old locket, a photograph, and a small, delicate collar that could only have belonged to a dog. Amy's heart skipped a beat. The collar was nearly identical to the one the puppy had been wearing when they found it, the same worn leather and the same strange symbol engraved into the buckle. "This belonged to the family that lived here," Michael said, picking up the photograph. It was faded with time, but the image of a young couple holding a puppy was still clear. "This has to be them." Amy stared at the photograph, her mind racing. The young couple in the picture looked so happy, standing in front of what was clearly the same farmhouse, though in far better condition. The puppy in their arms looked almost identical to the one they had found. The pieces began to fall into place. The puppy wasn't just a stray, it was connected to this family, perhaps a descendant of the same dog in the photo. But why had it led them here? And what happened to the couple in the picture? As they carefully sifted through the papers in the box, they found a letter written in careful, delicate handwriting. The letter told the story of the family who had lived on the farm many years ago. The couple had been deeply in love, but tragedy struck when the husband died in a sudden accident while working on the farm. Grief-stricken, the wife had struggled to cope with the loss, eventually retreating into isolation. The letter revealed that her only remaining comfort had been the family's beloved dog, the very one in the photograph. The letter ended abruptly, with the wife expressing her sorrow and regret, hinting at her decision to leave the farm behind. But there was something more, a cryptic line at the end of the letter, mentioning that the dog would always find its way back, no matter how far it wandered. Amy felt a chill run down her spine as she reread the line. The dog will always find its way back. Could it be that the puppy they had found was somehow connected to this dog? Was it possible that, generations later, the bloodline of that dog had carried with it the instinct to return to the farm, to the only home it had ever known? Michael was quiet for a moment, staring at the photograph. This puppy, it led us here. It knew there was something we needed to find. Amy nodded, her mind swirling with thoughts. The puppy's odd behavior, the way it had wandered so far, the strange symbol on its collar, it all made sense now. The puppy was part of the farm's history, carrying with it the legacy of a love lost too soon and a family broken by tragedy. As they sat there, the puppy curled up at their feet, its small body finally at rest. Amy looked down at the little dog, a deep sense of awe washing over her. This puppy, this tiny creature, had been carrying a story far older than they could have imagined. It had led them to uncover the final piece of a mystery long forgotten, a story of love, loss, and the unbreakable bond between humans and their animals. The discovery left them speechless. What they had assumed was a simple act of rescuing a lost puppy had turned into something much greater, a connection to the past, to a story that had been waiting to be told for years. As they carefully placed the items back in the box, Amy and Michael knew they would never forget this moment, or the tiny dog that had led them to it. The puppy had come full circle, returning to the place it was always meant to be. And in doing so, it had given the Williams family a story that would live on, a reminder of the power of loyalty, memory, and the enduring connection between the living and the past. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell.